Thanks, Denise. That was amazing. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. And before I begin, I just want to, I just ruined it. I just want to tell you a story. This is a story about me growing up. So I have to start with my parents. You know, my parents were amazing, are amazing. They were always very supportive of me and my brother, wanted us to be successful, be happy. They taught us to be nice to people. Basically, they would go out of their way and do anything that it took to help us be able to do the things that we wanted to do, whether it was sports or different activities, things like that. So they were amazing. But if I stereotype a little bit, right, like they also taught us that education is really important, school is something that you should focus on, and so I took that to heart. And so basically that means I was sort of like this as a kid, a little socially awkward. Actually, this is really a shout out to Kat, our VP of People Operations, who's at our booth. Her husband was actually the executive producer and edited the film, so go talk to her later. So I was probably more like, excuse me? I was probably more like this kid, right? I actually think there's a picture of me in kindergarten or first grade in a bow tie with suspenders with plaid shorts, I think. But it was the 70s, so cut me a break there. But you know, what I focused on was I focused on school, and I was really good at school. And basically, I was a nerd, right? But you know what? I was really good at it. I learned everything I needed to learn, whether it was math or science, which were my big areas, but even like the social sciences, and I even got sort of decent at writing, even though that was definitely not my skill set. But that was enough, that was enough to get me to where I wanted to be successful in school. I was a little socially awkward, pretty shy, but it worked for me, right? So fast forward a couple years, I go to college. And at college, I study engineering. And so there's a field where there's a lot of stuff to learn, right? Still lots of math and physics and all sorts of things like that. And I did what I had always done, which is, you get your problem set. I'd go into my room, I'd shut the door, I'd open the books, I'd bury myself in the books, and I'd study and learn and try to memorize, how people solve different problems and things like that. And that got me most of the way to what I needed to do. But I started to realize that I was never going to get through these problems on my own, right? These problem sets that we were given in engineering were so long and so challenging that really no one or very, very few people would be able to handle them on their own. And I certainly was not one of those people. And that's when I started to discover that, hey, this idea of shutting yourself off and sort of just by sheer force of will, just making yourself learn and be successful, hey, maybe this isn't everything that there is. And that's when I started to realize that I had to talk to other people. We would work on problem sets with other people. None of us would have answers to all the questions. In fact, oftentimes we'd meet and none of us would have answers to any of the questions. But we would be able to have conversations, and we would bring different insights to different parts of a problem, or maybe to different problems. And together, we would start to piece together little parts, like, hey, maybe this problem, we need to approach it from this angle. Or maybe that problem, that was something that we talked about at the end of that lecture, and that's how we should approach it. And what I started to learn was that by working together with other people, you really can create a whole that is larger than the sum of its parts. So, all right, now fast forward a few more years, and I end up in law school, all right? So some of you may know people who are in law school, have been to law school. Some of you may have even gone to law school, in which case I'm sorry for you. But if you know anything about law school, it's an environment where there certainly are rules and what we call the black letter law that you need to learn. That's the law that you take to pass the bar exam, right? So you can become a lawyer. But really the learning and what makes you successful not only in law school, but ultimately as a lawyer, is this ability to assess situations, be able to interact with other people, take their ideas, refine, critique them, understand where the strengths of their arguments are, where the weaknesses are. And it's this ability to interact that really makes you successful. So then after law school, of course, I go off into the real world, the working world. And as you can imagine, that lesson about needing to collaborate, work with others became even more critical. I mean, in the real world that all of you live in, I think you know that to be successful, you really need to work as a team with others. And if there's one critique about education the way it's historically worked, is that we don't teach that enough, right? So why am I telling you all this? Being an expert and being on your own and knowing, mastering your material, that's just not enough anymore, right? Like, I think I started to learn that, but it's more true today than it ever has been. Let's take a look at this survey that was put out by the World Economic Forum. They're the ones who put on the Davos Symposium every year. And they asked employers what skills were critical in the workplace in 2015 and also looking forward by 2020. This is pretty interesting, right? You'll see that certain things have jumped up quite a bit, creativity and critical thinking. A few others have slipped down a little bit, and then there are a lot of little new entrants, things about emotional intelligence and cognitive flexibility. So what does this mean? How can you adapt and even take advantage of this skills shift in order to be successful in your workplace and be able to shatter that glass ceiling? So I wanted to touch on 3 themes, right? So first, what is our advantage over robots? You all learn about automation taking over. We traditionally think about that being in more menial, mundane tasks. But think about radiologists, right? They read x-rays or other images and try to detect things. Is there any doubt that within a few years that with machine learning and lots of data to train on, that machines will be able to read those images more accurately and more consistently than people, right? And that's a job that I think the median salary for a radiologist is like $350,000. They have to go through like 8 years of post-college medical school and residency to be able to train there. So I think this idea of being able to critique and think critically is the key advantage we're going to have. Secondly, this resurgence of the right brain. You saw that creativity was the one that had jumped up 7 spots. To date, we haven't been able to teach machines with AI to really be creative. What they're really doing is doing pattern recognition and learning how to do certain things that people have done before, train on data, and then be able to do that more effectively and efficiently. But really where we can add value is being more creative and thinking outside the box a little bit. So that's an important area. And then thirdly, this idea for effective communication. So at Lucid, we recently partnered with the Economist Business Intelligence Unit to do a study on workplace communication, and a couple of interesting findings. First, you may not be surprised to hear that frequent workplace communication errors or problems are prevalent everywhere. You've probably experienced that yourself. But what was more interesting is that what people found was that workplace communication styles are a frequent source of the problem, right? And what we learned is that you can't attribute different communication styles to particular functional roles. So we can't say salespeople think this way and engineers think that way. Styles also do not correlate to gender. I think people tend to think that maybe women think and communicate in a more personal fashion, whereas maybe men are more analytical or functional communicators. That's actually totally not true. Across all of the metrics and spectrums, men and women said that they communicate in the same ways. In fact, men actually rated themselves as higher personal communicators than women. The interesting part was the only interesting difference they found was that different generations do communicate in slightly different styles. So what does that mean? I think that means that for us to be successful, you need to really gather a group of people who are unlike you, who think and communicate in different ways, who have different ideas, and then you need to be able to collaborate and critique and think critically together to be able to solve problems. And that's going to be how we are all successful and how you are successful in the future. I know from when I started, from starting when I went off to college and started to learn that I couldn't do it by myself, all the way through my work career and certainly to what we're building at Lucid, the key to our success has been finding a great group of people who bring different things to the table and allowing everyone to have an ability to sort of shape that conversation, to think critically. And that's what has allowed us to succeed so far, and I think that's what will help you in your career.